I'll wake up tomorrow morning, my social media pages will be full of people calling me a CUNT, whatever it is, or...
Mike Brewer built one of the biggest car shows on earth and nearly lost everything. They called him arrogant, greedy, even blamed him for betraying his best friend, Edd China. But behind the fame was a man fighting hate, heartbreak, and a near-fatal crash that changed him forever. This is the truth about Mike Brewer, the man everyone thought they knew, but never really did. Before the fame, before the cameras, before the world decided who he was, Mike Brewer was just a kid from Lambeth, South London, growing up in the smell of oil and exhaust. His father, Roger Wilkes, wasn't rich or famous, but he was the kind of man who could turn a rusty pile of metal into something worth driving. He ran a small garage, spent weekends tinkering with cars, and unknowingly built the foundation for his son's obsession. Mike's first love wasn't fame, it was a beige Mini 850cc. Not the kind of car that turns heads, but the kind that teaches you patience, precision, and pride. While other kids were chasing footballs, Mike was chasing horsepower. He watched his dad turn wrenches, learned the value of hard work, and understood early that cars weren't just machines, they were stories on wheels. He didn't know it yet, but those long nights in the garage were shaping a man who'd one day bring classic cars back from the dead in front of millions. But the road ahead wasn't smooth, because when Mike's passion turned into a career, the same thing that made him famous would also make him a target. By the late 90s, Mike Brewer wasn't just another bloke who loved cars, he was about to change how people watched them. Before YouTube builds and clickbait restorations, there was deals on wheels. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't scripted, it was raw. Just Mike, a used car lot, and his gift of turning rust into revenue. The show exploded on Channel 4, and suddenly this loudmouth Londoner became the face of British car television. Then came Driven, Pulling Power, Auto Trader, one after another. Mike had found his lane, but everything shifted in 2003 when Discovery Channel called. They wanted something bigger, a show where real cars got real makeovers, no gimmicks, no actors, and that's how Wheeler Dealers was born. Enter Edd China, the calm, brilliant mechanic with hands that could make any car purr again. Together, they became an unlikely duo, the talker and the tinkerer. Mike would hunt down the next project. Edd would bring it back to life, and week after week, fans watched miracles happen on four wheels. The chemistry was effortless. The profits were real. The world fell in love with the blend of business and craftsmanship. But with fame came deadlines, long shoots, and the weight of expectations. What started as a dream project slowly became an obsession. And behind those cheerful handshakes on camera, tension was quietly building. On screen, they were brothers. Off screen, things were starting to crack. The success of Wheeler Dealers had turned their small workshop into a global machine. Deadlines, sponsors, contracts, and a non-stop filming schedule that sometimes stretched 17 hours a day. Mike Brewer was juggling business deals, production notes, and camera cues. Edd China was buried in the garage, rebuilding cars that had to look perfect under studio lights. The pressure to outdo each episode was brutal. Discovery had moved the show to California, hoping to reach a bigger audience. For viewers, it looked like a dream: sun, surf, and shiny cars. But for Edd, it meant isolation, constant filming, and less creative control. The workshop, once a place of passion, started feeling like a cage. Sources close to the show said it wasn't arguments that broke them, it was exhaustion. Little things began to pile up: missed cues, creative notes, budget limits. Mike still believed in the formula. Edd wanted to slow down, show the process. The network wanted speed and profit. No one saw it publicly, but the chemistry was fading fast. And then, one day, a single decision would change everything. When Edd China announced he was leaving Wheeler Dealers in 2017, the internet erupted. Fans were shocked, angry, heartbroken, and within hours, Mike Brewer became the villain. The headlines wrote themselves: creative differences, Edd quits, Mike to blame. But what really happened behind the scenes wasn't nearly that simple. Mike claimed Discovery had offered Edd a choice: stay and adapt, or walk away. He said Edd had grown difficult, frustrated with filming costs, and detached from the team. Edd told a different story. He said the production wanted to cut down the workshop segments, the very soul of the show. Less mechanical detail, more commercial pacing. To him, it was betrayal, a move that traded passion for profit. That's when everything turned ugly. The fans sided with Edd. Brewer's inbox filled with hate, even death threats. His wife and daughter were harassed online, all because two men couldn't agree on how much of the show should still be about the cars. Mike fired back publicly, denying everything. He said no one ever planned to reduce the workshop work, that Edd's claims blindsided him, but the damage was done. The friendship that built Wheeler Dealers was over, and the internet had already picked its winner. But what the world didn't see was how close Mike came to walking away, too. For most people, success is supposed to feel like winning. For Mike Brewer, it started to feel like survival. After Edd China's exit, the internet turned on him overnight. Fans who once cheered him were now calling him a sellout, a liar, and the man who destroyed their favorite show. Comment sections filled with hate, forums exploded with conspiracy theories, and every post about Wheeler Dealers seemed to end with one name, Mike Brewer. But what viewers didn't see was how deep the fallout went. His wife, Michelle, began receiving threats. His daughter, still young, had to watch strangers tear apart her father's reputation online. Mike said later that it wasn't just criticism, it was cruelty. People sent him messages wishing he'd die, blaming him for things that never happened. For a man who'd spent decades entertaining people, it was a nightmare he couldn't escape. Discovery told him to stay quiet, to ride it out, but Mike couldn't just sit back. He spoke out, saying Edd wasn't pushed out, that he'd left by choice. But by then, no one wanted to listen. The narrative was set. Edd was the victim, Mike was the villain. Sponsors pulled away, event organizers canceled appearances, and every time he opened social media, he was reminded of how fast fame could flip. Behind the camera, he thought about walking away for good, but something in him refused to quit. He'd already faced danger in war zones and stared down death once before, and if he couldn't change the story people told about him, he'd at least make sure the show itself stayed alive. Long before the headlines and online hate, Mike Brewer had already faced something far more real than bad press. In 2010, he stepped away from the comfort of shiny showrooms and went somewhere few TV presenters ever dared, the front lines of Afghanistan. Discovery Channel had greenlit a new project called Frontline Battle Machines, a series that followed soldiers in active combat zones and explored the vehicles that kept them alive. For Mike, it wasn't about fame or ratings. It was about understanding what machines meant to the men whose lives depended on them. The trip was supposed to be controlled and relatively safe. But war doesn't follow scripts. One afternoon, while flying in a helicopter with British troops, gunfire erupted from below. Enemy rounds tore through the air, one striking the pilot in the head and another shredding a hydraulic line. The chopper was losing control. For a few terrifying minutes, Mike wasn't a TV host, he was just another man praying to make it out alive. Somehow, the pilot managed an emergency landing, and everyone survived. But that moment changed Mike forever. He rarely talks about what happened that day. The cameras kept rolling afterward, but something inside him had shifted. The experience stripped away the ego, the fame, the business. It reminded him how fragile everything really was. From that point on, the show wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about second chances, survival, and gratitude. He'd been to war and come back alive. The noise of fame couldn't scare him anymore. But as he returned to television, ready to rebuild, he didn't know another kind of battle was waiting, one that no bullet could prepare him for. When Wheeler Dealers returned after Edd's departure, most people expected it to fail. The fans were furious, the internet was still attacking, and Mike Brewer was walking into every episode with a target on his back. Discovery introduced a new face, Ant Anstead, a former police officer turned car builder. Charismatic, smart, and calm under pressure, Ant was supposed to be the perfect balance to Mike's energy. But replacing a fan favorite like Edd China was never going to be easy. From the very first episode, viewers were watching with arms crossed, waiting for mistakes. Social media buzzed with comments like, "It's not the same," or "This is just wrong." But Mike kept pushing forward. He knew the only way to win back respect was through the work, not arguments. So he and Ant got straight to business. The chemistry was different but authentic. Mike hunted deals with the same fire, and Ant brought his own style of precision and creativity to the workshop. Slowly, people began to notice something: the cars still looked incredible, and the heart of the show hadn't disappeared. Behind the cameras, Mike had made a personal vow: no drama, no feuds, just focus. He treated Ant not as a replacement, but as a partner. They spent long nights shooting, sometimes rebuilding cars that were more trouble than they were worth, just to prove the show could still deliver. The move back to the UK after several seasons in California brought a fresh tone, smaller garages, older cars, and a return to the roots that made fans fall in love in the first place. By the time the next wave of episodes aired, the hate had started to fade. Mike had survived the backlash, and Wheeler Dealers was quietly climbing again. But while his career was stabilizing, something deeper was changing too. The man behind the smile was learning what it truly meant to rebuild, not just cars, but himself. Away from the cameras, Mike Brewer was nothing like the man people thought they knew. On screen, he was loud, confident, always closing a deal. But off-screen, he was surprisingly private, a man who rarely shared anything personal, especially after seeing how quickly the public could turn. He's been married to Michelle Brewer for decades, a woman who's quietly stood behind every storm he's faced. She's not a celebrity, doesn't crave attention, but she's been the one person who never doubted him. Together, they raised a daughter, Chloe, and for Mike, family was the only place where fame didn't matter. He's admitted before that the backlash from Wheeler Dealers nearly broke that sense of balance. There were days when he didn't want to walk outside, when he feared that people saw the rumors before they saw the man. The online hate that started with a TV disagreement had found its way into his personal life. But Michelle's calmness kept him steady. She reminded him that the show didn't define him, his work ethic did. Still, the scars of public judgment don't fade easily. Even when the show found success again, Mike never fully relaxed. He stopped oversharing, avoided interviews that felt personal, and drew a hard line between his public persona and his real life. Behind closed doors, he was still that same boy from South London, hands covered in grease, chasing the sound of an engine coming back to life. Fame hadn't changed what he loved, it just made him more careful about who got to see it. Friends say Mike's happiest moments aren't in the studio or under bright lights, they're in his private garage, fixing something old that nobody else believes can run again. But just as he was starting to find peace, life reminded him how quickly everything can change, not through fame this time, but through something far more dangerous. For years, Mike Brewer had been the face of Wheeler Dealers, but behind that smile, he was exhausted. The hate from fans, the constant travel, the impossible filming schedules, it all started to wear him down. After Edd China left, Mike had tried to hold the show together, bringing in Ant Anstead and later Mark Elvis Priestley, but the energy wasn't the same. Every episode felt like a test, every appearance like a battle to prove he still belonged. Even when ratings stayed strong, Mike could feel himself burning out. The fame that once felt exciting had started to feel heavy, almost suffocating. There were nights he'd come home and tell Michelle he was done, that he couldn't keep being the guy everyone wanted to hate. He'd lost friends, trust, and at times, his own peace of mind. For a man who'd built his life around cars, he suddenly wasn't sure if he even loved the business anymore. The show that had given him everything had also taken pieces of him that no one saw. And when Discovery executives started suggesting new creative directions, Mike began to question if the show was still his. What most fans never knew is that Mike came dangerously close to walking away. He had the money, the legacy, the respect of the industry. There was nothing left to prove. But something stopped him. It wasn't pride or contracts. It was the same reason he started all this in the first place: the love of cars and the people who still cared about them. That spark, buried under years of pressure, still flickered. So instead of quitting, he chose to rebuild again, not the cars this time, but the brand, the tone, and himself. He cut back appearances, shifted filming closer to home, and restructured how Wheeler Dealers was made. But as he tried to start fresh, a new challenge was waiting, rebuilding not just the show, but his reputation. When Wheeler Dealers returned under the refreshed format, most viewers didn't realize just how much Mike Brewer had risked to keep it alive. The decision to move the production back to the UK wasn't just about logistics, it was about coming home, about grounding the show in the authenticity that made it special in the first place. Partnering with Mark Elvis Priestley gave the series new chemistry. Elvis wasn't there to replace anyone. He brought a mechanic's realism and calm that balanced Mike's high energy. For the first time in years, it felt like the show could breathe again. The newer episodes quietly started winning people back. The storytelling was sharper, the workshop scenes longer, and the deals more personal. Fans who had sworn off the series started returning. They saw a version of Mike that wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing the same thing he always had: the perfect car, the perfect restoration, the satisfaction of turning something broken into something alive again. Off camera, he focused on building his car dealership, running events, and mentoring younger mechanics who grew up watching him. Even some of his loudest critics began to admit that no one could have carried Wheeler Dealers this far without breaking. The man who'd once been the most hated figure in the car TV world had outlasted the outrage, the rumors, and the burnout. The comeback wasn't loud, and it wasn't about redemption. It was steady, earned, and quietly powerful. Mike Brewer didn't reinvent himself, he just outlasted the noise. But even as the show found new success, one story still lingered, the one name he couldn't escape, the unfinished chapter that fans still whispered about. If you've made it this far, you've seen the full picture, not the headlines, not the rumors, but the real story of a man who refused to give up. Mike Brewer isn't perfect. He's human, loud, stubborn, passionate, but he's still here, turning wrenches and chasing that next great build. If you grew up watching Wheeler Dealers, or if you've ever fixed something everyone else said was beyond saving, then you already understand him more than you think. So, before you go, hit like if you believe in comebacks, subscribe for more stories the cameras never told, and share this video so more people can see the truth behind the name.